Our main story tonight concerns healthcare, the industry that's done basically no innovating in the past 50 years when it comes to big rolls of paper you plop your bare arse on. Specifically, we're going to be talking about Medicaid, the public insurance programme that provides health coverage to people with low incomes. It is massive, representing $1 out of every $6 spent on healthcare in the US. And as of last year, at least, it covered more than 90 million people. And the reason I put that in the past tense is thanks to something called the Medicaid unwinding. That number has been plummeting and fast.
Hundreds of thousands of Americans are finding out they may be without all-important Medicaid coverage.
It's a process they're calling Medicaid unwinding.
They basically said, hey, sorry, you don't have insurance. We took you off the books.
They didn't even tell me that it was dropped.
We have people that we have served for 15 to 20 years, and suddenly they're dropped off Medicaid.
It's true. People have been getting kicked off Medicaid, and sometimes with no notice. In the last year, net enrolment has dropped by over 11 million individuals, including nearly 5 million children. And just for once, could the government blindside people with something beneficial or even just fun? Like if one day Congress announced they'd be adding Shrek to Mount Rushmore. That would be something. He'd fit in so naturally you may not have even noticed. He's in there. There he is right now. And that is better. Mount Rushmore is better with Shrek on it. And the thing is, all of this was to some extent by design. The unwinding has its origins during the pandemic because when COVID started, one early relief bill had a requirement that states couldn't kick people off Medicaid, which was a good idea, given that there was a giant global public health emergency and millions of people were losing work and getting sick. But at the end of last March, that policy expired, and for the first time in 3 years, states started checking people's Medicaid eligibility again. Some states, like Georgia, even tried putting out PSAs like this one to alert people to the changes that were coming.
Hey, did you know there may be some big changes coming to your Medicaid coverage?
You're a talking peach.
Sure am, but that's not important right now. What's important is that you visit staycovered.ga.gov and update your contact information.
Why?
Well, the federal public health emergency may be ending soon, so it's important that you verify and update your Medicaid account.
Thank you, Mr. Peachy.
Oh, no, that's my brother. I'm George.
It's excellent. I mean, it's all very good, but my favourite part there is the shopper saying, you're a talking peach, and it responding, sure am, but that's not important right now. Disagree, talking peach. You're a piece of fruit that can talk. That is maybe the most significant event in the history of humanity, or fruit. If that were to happen, every government would have to rethink their farming policies immediately. The UN would hold an emergency assembly regarding the talking peach issue. And how could anyone ever be comfortable eating fruit again, knowing that at any moment it could go suddenly, ow, stop it, you're hurting me. Now, unfortunately, despite magnificent PSAs like that, not everyone heard about the Medicaid unwinding or knew exactly what they had to do to keep their health care. And what that has meant is that a process that was theoretically just about removing people who no longer qualified has in many states turned into an administrative clusterfuck because 69% of those who lost coverage had it terminated for procedural reasons, like missing paperwork, with that number climbing as high as 93% in states like Nevada and New Mexico. That means the overwhelming majority weren't necessarily ineligible. They might have been. Their circumstances might have changed, but most lost coverage because, for one reason or another, they or their parent or guardian never completed the renewal process. And for many, that wasn't their fault, but the state's. Take this Florida family who received zero notice that they had to do anything to maintain their Medicaid coverage, then suddenly found that they'd lost it at the worst possible time.
The past 24 hours have been a nightmare for Liz Adams. In that time, she found out her 2 kids were dropped from Medicaid. The news also came a day before her 7-year-old son, Brian, was set to have a biopsy procedure. He's currently in remission for leukemia.
I'm mad. I am mad. I do not understand how they can do this to a child.
Adams tells us she never got a letter, a call, or any other form of communication from DCF.
No one else I can talk to, not even the doctor's offices, can do anything. They're like, we can tell them that it's absolutely necessary that he needs medical treatment, but we can't make them give you your insurance back.
That is terrible because anyone could tell you that kid needs medical treatment. I could tell you that. A magic 8-ball could tell you that. That octopus that used to predict soccer matches could tell you. If you put out 2 pieces of food, each labelled with an option of what to do, it would ignore them both and write in the sand, what the fuck is wrong with you? Give the kid Medicaid, you monsters. But the thing is, everything about the current unwinding is emblematic of much larger issues with how we've always administered Medicaid. So given that, tonight, let's talk about Medicaid in general. It was first enacted in 1965 as part of the same law that created Medicare, the programme providing healthcare to the elderly. And from the start, it was set up very differently because while Medicare is a purely federal programme open primarily to Americans 65 and older, Medicaid is a partnership between the federal government and the states, where the federal government contributes at least $1 in matching funds for every dollar a state spends. And while there are some federal requirements that states must meet, they get a lot of leeway in deciding how to run their programmes. And when done well, the services they provide can be transformative. For instance, Medicaid can pay for people with disabilities to have home health workers come and help with mobility and daily living, which is huge, as this activist pointed out a few years ago when cuts to Medicaid spending were being floated.
Medicaid paid for my shower today. It made it so I was able to eat breakfast, helped me put on my clothes. How's it going? I breathe because of Medicaid, my ventilator. I move through the world because of a wheelchair funded by Medicaid. Medicaid touches everything in my life and makes everything possible.
Exactly. When Medicaid works, it can be amazing. Unfortunately, it often doesn't work that way, which you can probably guess by the fact that we're talking about it now. If this show was supposed to make you feel good, it wouldn't be hosted by me. It'd be hosted by Stanley Tucci. Can you imagine? You'd be watching an impossibly horny 30-minute deep dive on Negronis right now. That's a better show. I wish this were that show. You wish this were that show, but guys, I'm sorry, it just isn't. The thing is, not all states offer care like that or make it easy to get, but there's actually an even bigger problem here, which is that in general, even for those who qualify for Medicaid, it can be incredibly difficult to access. And the problems begin with basic administrative fuck-ups, like what happened to this one-year-old in Florida.
Raven received a Medicaid health insurance card, which, by the way, has her correct date of birth on it. But the state kept rejecting it when her doctor tried to run it on grounds she's not yet born.
She is not born. She is 13 months old alive, but she is not born. She is still apparently a fetus in my womb. So I just pray she doesn't get hurt or doesn't get severely sick because I'm out of luck. They've got copies of her birth certificate, her social security, everything to prove she was born, including being physically there.
Wow. That family actually went $2,000 into debt paying for routine care for their child while the state tried to figure out if she existed or not, which is ridiculous. If you want to know if someone was born, here is a quick trick. Just ask, were you born? If they say yes, they were born. If they say no, they were born. And if they just stare blankly at you, they were born. I've made this into a decision tree, but it really doesn't feel like that should have been fucking necessary. For years, people trying to access Medicaid in their state have had to navigate through poorly designed websites, long wait times, and complex forms and notices. And those burdens have had a real effect. Even before the chaos of the unwinding, in 2022, about a quarter of uninsured people eligible for Medicaid were not enrolled in it, often due to enrollment barriers. And the thing about Medicaid is, you don't just have to go through that circus once. You have to renew your coverage every year, which can be incredibly onerous. At one point, Tennessee was sending families who wanted to renew their Medicaid a questionnaire that could be as long as 47 pages. And the state could be pretty careless about doing that, as one family lost coverage after their renewal packet was accidentally mailed to a horse pasture, which is obviously absurd because horses aren't eligible for Medicaid. They get healthcare through a very different programme called the Glue Factory. We all know this. And look, glitches can occur in any system, and they can happen more often in government programmes, which do tend to be underfunded, understaffed, and operating on ancient technology. And I'm not trying to rain shit down on honest government employees who have to process an endless barrage of paperwork. I have total sympathy for how demanding those jobs are. In fact, there's exactly one group of government employees that it's OK to make fun of for something that is not their fault, and that is Secret Service agents, for the fact they are constantly being bitten by the president's dog. I'm sorry, I hope they're all fine, but I'm still going to laugh every time I think about that. But there are times when it feels like the obstacles to getting Medicaid have been put there deliberately so that states can keep those that they see as undeserving off the rolls. Because states get a lot of discretion in deciding who is and isn't eligible for benefits, and in some, they keep the bar to qualify troublingly high, all while adopting a deeply moralising tone. Take what happened when the Trump administration gave some states permission to implement work requirements as a condition of Medicaid eligibility. Some were eager to put those in place, like this state rep in Kentucky.
Why do you think that work requirements are going to work?
It's an incentive. I think that there is dignity in work. It's something that is about the human person. So often I say that sometimes our charity becomes toxic to people. In our wanting to help them, sometimes we've hurt them.
OK, putting aside that calling access to basic healthcare charity is immediately infuriating, it is something that's about the human person? Are you absolutely sure that's a sentence? Because it sounds more like something a drunk alien would say while trying to describe a David Foster Wallace book. It's something that's about the human person, you know, the humanoids and their person feelings. But it's worth noting that the majority of adults on Medicaid, about 63%, are already working full or part-time. Those who aren't are generally in school or might have a disability preventing them from working, only leaving a very small percentage of the population to whom the policies could even apply. Now, fortunately, Kentucky didn't end up implementing a work requirement, but unfortunately, Arkansas did, and it didn't go great. For a start, simply complying with it was a hassle. Beneficiaries had to report their work activities on a glitch-plagued web portal. And just 6 months in, 18,000 Arkansans have been stripped off Medicaid and locked out of reapplication until the following year. And for some of those people who, again, were already working, losing access to healthcare completely upended their lives, like this man who had a job at a chicken plant.
Adrian McGonigal's life is coming undone. He became one of the people that the state has booted from the Medicaid rolls in the last 3 months. He discovered this only when he went to fill prescriptions at this drugstore, and the pharmacist told him, sorry, your coverage has been canceled.
And that it was going to be like $340 for one of the medications and like $80 for the other one.
So he left empty-handed. This was a big deal because McGonigal has severe COPD, a chronic lung disease that makes it difficult to breathe. Without his meds, he landed in the hospital multiple times and missed a lot of work. His supervisor tried to accommodate him, but he wasn't healthy enough to perform his job, so he lost it.
Yeah, the work requirement for Medicaid caused someone who was already on Medicaid and working to lose both Medicaid and their work, which has to be the most upsetting thing that's ever happened in a chicken processing plant, apart from all the other things that happen in there on purpose. And while Arkansas ditched that work requirement after less than a year, Georgia is now experimenting with one, and it is proving just as stupid and just as frustrating. And that is the thing. So much of the talk around Medicaid seems to centre on the fear that someone somewhere might be gaming the system. You hear that argument all the time.
The people in my district that work hard, that struggle to pay their health care, they're very frustrated when they see someone they know in their small town where everybody knows everybody. They see someone that's not working.
Why should somebody have to go to work every day and pay taxes to provide something to someone who could do the same thing but chooses not to?
And I don't think it's unreasonable to say that able-bodied people who are working age, who are not disabled, who are not seniors, should have to go to work if they want someone else to pay for their health care.
Look, it goes without saying that I disagree with Matt Gaetz on a lot of issues. His stance on immigration, his stance on gun control, his stance on hanging around with teenage girls. We don't see eye to eye on most things, but on this I particularly disagree. Because states already aggressively monitor Medicaid eligibility, and some of their efforts can be deranged. Take Tennessee. Their state inspector general has a Medicaid fraud unit that posts the names and photos of people it arrests on a government website and social media, with some even ending up on a most wanted list. This woman was charged with a felony for supposedly receiving Tennessee benefits while living in Mississippi and wound up having to pay $2,000 to bond out of jail and even more to hire an attorney, all just to show that she'd not in fact committed Medicaid fraud. Her driver's licence just had an outdated Mississippi address. So her only real crime there was not wanting to stand in line at the DMV for 8 solid hours. The head of that Tennessee unit even acknowledged it cost far more to run the fraud unit than the office will ever recoup from people on Medicaid who are usually low income, because even if the state recovered every dollar from charges brought against beneficiaries in 2022, the total would amount to less than $900,000 compared to the office's budget of $6.4 million a year. And look, I'm not an accountant, despite having resting budget analyst face. But even I know that makes no financial sense. And look, I'm not saying Medicaid fraud doesn't exist. It does. But for the most part, the costliest fraud isn't being committed by patients getting care they may not technically be eligible for. It's providers doing shit like this.
A husband and wife living a fairy tale lifestyle paid for by all of us. Over a 3 to 4 year period, they were true jet setters in their private $900,000 plane. The Herons ran 2 health services in North Carolina. They billed the state's Medicaid system at least $17 million. Most, if not all, of the patients they claimed to help were already dead. Their names gleaned from obituaries and cross-checked with the Medicaid database.
That is obviously reprehensible, but if I could just give one quick note to that news station. Everyone knows what dead people are. You don't have to show B-roll of a cemetery for us to understand the concept of death. Just like when you said the Harrons ran 2 health services, you didn't need to show stock footage of a doctor writing something down on a notepad. But interestingly, you didn't do it all the time, did you? Like, when you said the phrase $17 million, you didn't feel the need to show this stock footage of cash slowly falling out of the air. But why not? How else will your viewers understand what money is? As if all that weren't bad enough, that guy liked to post his business affirmations online, including never outlive your usefulness, doing big things requires one not to be stuck on the little things, and I'm not doing a business that's new, I'm doing a new way of doing business. A quote he loved so much, he posted it a second time a month later, but in red text instead of yellow. And I'll admit, it didn't really resonate when I read the yellow text over dark green background version. But once I saw the red text over neon green one, I was like, wow, that is so true. That's totally what he was doing. But that is by no means the only case of Medicaid providers defrauding the government. In Arizona, there was a group of fake rehab centres that for years claimed fraudulent reimbursements for patients who were either getting services they didn't need or not getting them at all, reportedly taking in more than $2 billion from the state. And some of their submissions really should have raised red flags, like a bill for alcohol rehabilitation for a 4-year-old, which is a little difficult to believe. If toddler alcoholism were a genuine problem in this country, you'd have definitely seen a TLC series about that. You know that is true, and you'd probably have watched it. And while in both of those cases the providers were eventually caught, it took years for that to happen. Again and again, the priority seems to be making sure no individual gets a penny more healthcare than they deserve, even as states are weirdly blithe about much bigger amounts of money flowing out the door to large organisations. And speaking of large organisations, there is one last massive flaw with our Medicaid system, and it has to do with managed care organisations, or MCOs. These are private companies states contract to deliver and pay for healthcare. Currently, 72% of Medicaid beneficiaries are enrolled in a care plan overseen by an MCO, and it is big business. The 5 biggest MCOs are on the Fortune 500, including Centene, which has long been a favourite of this guy.
Centene! Yeah, the healthcare plan provider for government-sponsored programs like Medicare and Medicaid. This one's a long-time Kramer fave. It's been out of favor. But Michael Neidorff tells such a compelling story. Michael Neidorff, Centene, what a horse that thing is. You have impressed me over the years as someone who is really out for the consumer to get the best healthcare.
You have Michael Neidorff on all the time. No, Centene.
I think that Michael Neidorff is amazing.
By the way, he looks great for 77. You got to give him.
He's amazing, and he's just also a fantastic charitable man.
OK, you probably already knew that Kramer's wrong about the company, but before we even get to that, I'll point out that the guy they just said looked great for 77 was actually 79, and more importantly, died just 4 months later. It seems any optimistic prediction that Jim Kramer's involved with is enough to kill a business or even a person. Seeing him compliment you on TV is the closest thing we have to watching the tape from The Ring in real life. Now, as for Centene itself, there are serious questions about how it's made some of its money. In 2021, after Ohio sued it for overbilling Medicaid, it settled and paid the state $88 million. In fact, it's now settled allegations of overbilling in at least 19 states for nearly $1 billion. And I would argue that if you've had to do that, you may not deserve to exist as a company anymore, let alone have Wall Street's thirstiest business boy go hubba hubba ooga over your stock price. And look, financial damage is one thing, but the most infuriating thing about MCOs is that, as with so many players in our for-profit healthcare system, they are incentivised to cut costs at the expense of necessary care, because MCOs get paid a set monthly amount per person, meaning they get a fixed rate. So their profit is whatever they don't spend on patients. And you can probably see where this is going. In state after state, there have been heartbreaking stories of MCOs denying care and prioritising cost savings over patients. There have been headlines about this in Florida, headlines about it in Texas, and headlines in Iowa. And just to focus on Iowa, it transitioned to using MCOs to run its Medicaid program in 2016. In just its first 3 years, there was a nearly 900% increase in members being illegally denied services or care. And some of the cost-cutting was absolutely enraging. Like what happened with Louis Facenda, who has cerebral palsy and was living with his mother. He needs a lot of care, which, prior to the switch over, was provided by Medicaid. But once an MCO got involved, he lost a lot of what he'd been getting, starting with his medications.
It was a nightmare. It was literally a nightmare. What am I going to do? I can't afford all that medication.
Also cut were his daily nurse visits. So for 6 weeks, Louis went without the in-home bathing and diaper changing he had had for years.
He wasn't getting changed like he would normally get changed 2 or 3 times or more a day. It wasn't just the services, it was the mental part of his state of mind, not understanding why all this was happening.
Look, that's obviously maddening, and it doesn't get any better when you hear a doctor at AmeriHealth, the MCO that took over in Iowa, explaining in a hearing about a similar patient just what the corporate thinking was about the necessity of keeping people clean.
People have bowel movements every day where they don't completely clean themselves, and we don't fuss over too much. People are allowed to be dirty. You know, I would allow him to be a little dirty for a couple of days.
Look, I'll be honest, when I first heard that, I thought that has to be taken out of context. There is no way a doctor, a licensed physician, would testify in a hearing that he thinks it's OK if people have shit on them for days. So we got the full hearing. I'm not going to play it for you. I'm just going to tell you, he said it, he meant it, and it made me want to punch a hole in the wall. And just watch what happens when Louis and his mum were told about what that doctor just said.
What would you say to him if he was here?
I would spit in his face, to be honest. Yeah, right, Louis? You like to be clean. I think it's horrible. I don't have words for that.
Yeah, I'm kind of struggling for words too. Although I will say, Louis did kind of nail it there by blowing that raspberry. And I also appreciated that reporter doing a full Jim from The Office look to camera and nodding. But if I absolutely had to put it into words, I guess I'd say, fuck that doctor with a rusty canoe. I hope he gets tetanus of the balls. And if he has a problem with my language there, I'd say, I'm allowed to be dirty. People are allowed to be a little dirty sometimes. Apparently that's doctors' fucking orders. And while legally, I have to tell you, AmeriHealth eventually restored Louis' service, it is a disgrace it was even a fight to begin with. Look, the reality of Medicaid is that too often it's hard to get, easy to lose, and not a priority for the government or the companies we hire to deliver care. So, what can we do? Well, as I've said before, I personally think the big solution here is to adopt a universal healthcare model, but in the meantime, I'd argue both the current unwinding and Medicaid programs in general need to be run with significantly more care and efficiency. And there are ways to do that. For instance, when it comes to determining eligibility, maybe, rather than sending 47-page forms to horses, states can instead rely on information they already have in their databases. That seems like it would make a bit more sense. And Michigan is actually a good example here. It worked with a design non-profit to retool its application and renewal processes for all public benefits, and the result was that 95% of renewals were submitted on time, with a 60% drop in user errors. On the federal end, Congress could ensure that the agency that administers Medicaid has the resources it needs to oversee state compliance. And finally, when it comes to MCOs, if they are going to continue playing a role here, there clearly has to be way more oversight, with performance reviews being thorough and public, especially when it comes to things like denials of care. And until such time as we do all of that, the very least we can do is make Medicaid PSAs that actually prepare people for the realities of our current mess of a system.
Hey, did you know you might be eligible for Medicaid?
You're a talking peach.
Sure am, but that's not important right now.
What do you mean? You can talk? Could all peaches always talk?
Sure we could, but don't focus on that, because I want to talk to you about Medicaid.
Is anyone else seeing this talking peach?
I see it too, Mommy.
The process of getting on Medicaid is different depending on where you live.
Okay.
The good news is that pretty much in all states, generally, low-income children, pregnant women and families, and people with disabilities are eligible for Medicaid, with some exceptions.
Are there going to be a bunch of bullshit loopholes or something?
Oh, you have no idea.
Well, he's right. Take my state, Texas.
Oh my God, there's more of you.
Mama, what is that thing?
Well, I'm a sweet potato. Now, let's say you're a single mom with 2 kids. If you're making over $334 a month, you're not eligible for Medicaid at all.
It's true. And in Georgia, if you don't have kids, you better be working. Otherwise, you can't get Medicaid.
Hey, good for you. You're not running a charity over there. There's dignity in work. It's something about the human person.
Yes,
I agree.
Hey, y'all. I'm from Louisiana.
Mom, what's up with this one's eyes?
Yeah, this one's got wrong eyes.
In my state, we check your finances every 3 months to make sure you haven't gotten some overtime or picked up some seasonal work or nothing.
Guess what? In Wyoming, if you're an adult without kids or disabilities or a pregnancy, you can't qualify for Medicaid at all, no matter what your income is. There's literally no way to qualify for it.
Oh my Lord, is that true?
Even if you're like out of work and like making no money?
Yes!
Honestly, that's fucked up.
It is fucked up.
I agree with the coconut. That's super fucked up.
Mommy, I'm scared.
I know, buddy. Come over here. Stand on this side, away from the produce.
That's a cute kid you got there.
Thanks.
Don't worry, his Medicaid coverage won't be cut.
I smell more bullshit loopholes.
Unless you don't fill out the proper paperwork. But also, maybe if you do. But there's a glitch in the system. Like, I don't know, us mailing your form to a horse pasture.
Oh, it's happened, y'all.
Mm-hmm. Hey, how do we know your kid was really, born anyway?
Excuse me?
Yeah, if that kid wasn't born, then he doesn't get Medicaid. Prove he was born. Prove he was born.
Prove he was born.
Prove he was born.
Prove he was born.
Prove he was born. Was I born?
Prove he was born. Prove he was born.
Stop that!
Prove he was born.
I don't have to prove anything to you. You're vegetables. The child is the proof.
Listen, I know this is all complicated, so feel free to just give your state Medicaid office a call if you have any questions.
Be patient, though. In Florida, it takes more than an hour to get a live person on the phone.
No way, dude.
Además, hay un 80% de probabilidad de que su llamada se desconecte por accidente.
I don't speak Spanish.
He said there's an 80% chance your call would disconnect by accident.
Sí.
What's the point of even calling then?
Because it's a fun thing to do.
Well, I agree with that.
Okay, we're leaving now. Thank you, Mr. Peachy.
Oh, Mr. Peachy is my brother.
And you ate him last week.
What?
And now we're gonna eat you.
Oh, shit.
Ah!